Okay, good evening to all. Thank you for joining us for our brief halachic discussion that's going to relate to the laws of Tisha B'Av. We pray for the arrival of the Mashiach, and we could use them, we could always use them. I think we really feel this year that we could really use a Mashiach. It would be nice to get ourselves, Klal Yisrael, and the world out of this very unenjoyable predicament. But in case Mashiach, God forbid, does not come, we have the practice of mourning the destruction of the temple. And we do that with very specific halachos. And we're going to talk a little bit about Erev Tisha B'Av and Tisha B'Av, and also a little bit after Tisha B'Av. And we already had a discussion that related to the 9 days and the fact that we have a whole series of mourning practices that begin already on Rosh Chodesh. The one that is most known is the fact that we avoid fleishiks, we avoid meat, and we avoid wine starting Rosh Chodesh. Now that is actually post-Talmudic. If you look at the Talmud indicates that on Erev Tisha B'Av, the last meal before the fast, should be a meal where you don't enjoy yourself. You should be in a state of mourning. Don't drink wine. Don't eat meat. And even when it comes to cooked dishes, you should only have one cooked dish. So from Talmudic sources, this idea of avoiding meat and wine relates specifically to Erev Tisha B'Av. Nevertheless, it is a minhag in Klal Yisrael, going back good 900 years, if not longer, that we avoid meat and wine. Obviously, as we discussed in the past, in situation of a siyama would be permissible. But we're going to focus a little bit about Erev Tisha B'Av itself and the meal that we have on Erev Tisha B'Av, the Suda Mafsekes. Now, what we're going to start off is with a responsa of the Maharshal, Reb Shlomo Luria, the great authority of the 16th century. He's a contemporary of Ramoshe Isserlis the Ramah, and actually they were mishpacha, they were cousins. They had different approaches. While Ramoshe Isserlis, always worked with a tremendous amount of respect for minhag, even if in literature it appears that the minhag is problematic. Nevertheless, for the Ramah, minhag is king. Reb Shlomo Luria, on the other hand, had a little bit of a different approach. There are different areas in hashkafa and philosophy and outlook where these two great scholars had different approaches as it relates to the study of philosophy, for example. Ramoshe Isserlis, at one point, quotes Aristotle. His cousin, Rosh Shlomo Luria, gets very upset at him. And he says that the Torah should put on a sackcloth for the fact that you quote Aristotle. So these are different approaches, different individuals. Both are great. And what we're going to go ahead is see how they both address a very specific issue. And then there's surprise afterwards. So let's start with Maharshal. So we're reading from the responsa of the Maharshal of Reb Shlomo Luria, and he is talking about Erev Tisha B'Av. The Talmud notes that on Erev Tisha B'Av, that last meal, you're only supposed to have one cooked item, not two. So people came up with the following approach, that what they would do is that they would have a large, significant meal with several cooked items in the afternoon of Erev Tisha B'Av before Mincha. Then they would go ahead and make their way to shul with a loaded stomach because they ate a significant amount of very enjoyable delicacies. After Mincha, you go home and then you have your Tisha B'Av meal, which would include the one cooked dish, traditionally the egg. We are familiar with the bread and ashes. So the question was, if this is considered acceptable. She'elah was asked from Shlomo Luria. Ishari, is it permissible? Le'echol, to eat. Kama minei tavshilin shel chalav, several different type of cooked dishes, milk, meaning we're not dealing with fleishiks, because the minhag is we avoid fleishiks throughout the 9 days. Would this be acceptable be'erev Tisha B'Av kodem mincha, before mincha? Ve'achar kach, and then afterwards, after mincha, ochlin seudas mavsekes, right? Beperot ala karka, they would eat no cooked dishes, fruit yes, because when the Talmud wants you to limit that last meal before Tisha B'Av, it relates specifically to cooked items, fruit would not be included. But the question is, when you have that significant meal from beforehand, does that create a problem? Because it appears to be against the spirit of Erev Tisha B'Av. Erev Tisha B'Av is not a time to have a loaded meal. And based on the fact that it goes against the spirit, says Reb Shlomo Luria, Shuvah, his answer is Nireh, it appears to me, Otan, those individuals, She'ochlin ma'adanim, that they eat enjoyable foods, ma'adonim, Be'erev Tisha B'Av and Erev Tisha B'Av, Be'kama minei tigunin, all kind of different deep fried items, right? Perhaps they use an air fryer, so it's not so unhealthy, right? Lerova tavshilin, and then they have a variety of dishes. Keilu have sudat shlomo, as if they are sitting there at a royal banquet by King Solomon, not the restaurant, but by the table of the king himself. Now, the only thing they don't do is obviously early in the afternoon, ein ochlin basar v'shotin yain. Obviously, they don't eat meat or drink wine. Bottom line, says Marshall, that if you ask me what I think about such a practice, bivadai, there's no question in my mind, have, it's considered, bichlal, it is included in the verse, beten reshaim, the stomach of the evildoers. Marshall was against the practice that was done then, it is done today, of having a significant meal before mincha. For Maharshal to have those enjoyable delicacies and an enhanced meal before Mincha Erev Tisha B'Av is unacceptable. And therefore he labels it Beten Reshaim. Now look how different his contemporary cousin Ramosha Isserlis approaches this practice. So here we have in Shulchan Aruch the Haggah, which are the words of Ramah. And he says, minhag, the minhag bechlal glilot Ashkenaz, throughout the settlements of German communities in Ashkenazi Jewry. Le'echol seuda kvua kodem mincha, to eat a permanent, significant meal before mincha. Ve'achar kach, and afterwards, what do? Mitpalelim mincha, they daven mincha. Ve'ochlin suda mavseket, and they eat us Suda Mafseket. So, in other words, Ramah shares with us as a given that it is acceptable to follow the minhag of having the enhanced meal before mincha, and then the limited meal following Talmudic tradition of only having one cooked item, that is done after mincha. And he says, "V'noagina the minhag is leharbot ksat b'suda rishana." They have a significant meal. Meaning, perhaps for the Maharshal, the idea of having a meal that fills you up, that's enjoyable, that has a variety of foods, is against the spirit of Erev Tisha B'Av. Ramah tells us, listen, they are doing it for a good reason. Why are they doing it? Kedei shelo yazik lahem ata'anit. We all know that if you are going to enter into your fast day starving, the fast day will be even more difficult than it should be. And therefore, Ramah defends the practice that his cousin sees as problematic. He defends it because their intention is for one reason. Kedei shelo yazik lahem ata'anit. That people are doing it not to have hezek, damage from the fasting. Fine, so this is just interesting how it's noted. We're all familiar with the minhag, and what Ramah tells us that it's acceptable, it's the minhag Yisrael. For me, it's always surprising to read what Magen Avraham. So this is, we're going to move forward a little bit. We're going to move to a commentator of the of the 17th century, Reb Avraham Gombiner. And Reb Avraham Gombiner tells us that you should know, Velini, right, appears to me, ta'am acher. In other words, for me, the enhanced meal, and it is, and it has been an Erev Tisha B'Av before Mincha, an enhanced meal. For him, the reason we have that enhanced meal is mipnei, it is because shebizman bait sheni, during the second temple period, haya yom tov Tisha B'Av. In other words, you always is something that sometimes we wonder, what was Tisha B'Av, or how was Tisha B'Av practiced during the second temple period? Meaning, yes, they had a temple, but no doubt during the Babylonian exile, Tisha B'Av was a fast day. So how did they approach it during the second temple period? And shares with us the Magen Avraham that you should know, during the second temple period, Tisha B'Av was actually a Yom Tov. It was a time for them to express their gratitude to the Almighty that they have returned to Eretz Yisrael and rebuilt the Beis Hamikdash. Says Magen Avraham, based on the fact that in the past, this was a day of celebration, so therefore, we commemorate that. So he says that during the second temple period, hayu ayam marbin beseuda, if we would have the ability to enter into some kind of time capsule and return back 2,000 years ago, our ancestors during Bai Sheni were celebrating on Tisha B'Av and having a meal and saying, thank you, Almighty, for the rebuilding. So therefore, to commemorate that, obviously we cannot have a festive meal on Tisha B'Av itself, but to commemorate the festivities of the past, af achshav, so to now, lo zazu mimena, we have not budged from the practice, and we have a commemoration, lehiyot lezikaron, to commemorate, but it's not just a commemoration of the past. This is something we are trying to remember of what is waiting for us in the future. Sheyehapech bimera biyameinu lesason lesimcha. On Tisha B'Av, it is not just the time to mourn the past. It's not just the time to cry regarding the destruction of the past. It is a time to remember that the day will come when there's going to be a rebuilding. The day will come when Tisha B'Av is going to be a time of celebration. And therefore, and this is halachic, when on Erev Tisha B'Av, you're going to have a meal before Mincha. And that meal is going to have a variety of foods that are cooked. And you're not going to be sitting on the floor. And it, yes, will be a little bit more festive than the meal you're going to have after Mincha. As you are sitting there by the table, remember these words of the Magen Avraham, that you are in some ways commemorating and celebrating, because it will turn again into a celebration. Be'er b'meheira b'yameinu Mashiach is going to come, and Tisha B'Av will be a day of marbin besuda, of great excitement, increase our meal. So please have that in mind. So while for the Maharshal, for Rabbi Shlomo Luria, the large significant meal before Mincha was problematic, and while for the Ramah it was acceptable, for the Magen Avraham it has a reason, it has a purpose, it has a goal. And that's what we should have in mind. So this is a very strong statement by the Magen Avraham. Now, the next thing we're going to study here is a statement made by the Beis Yosef. Why is this locked in here? It's a statement by the Beit Yosef. Beis Yosef, I'm not going to go through it in all detail, but he shares with us that there was a practice in some communities, not an acceptable practice, but it was a practice nevertheless, that in the afternoon of Tisha B'Av, women would wash their head. Now that is a violation of what the Mishnah tells us, that one of the things we avoid on Tisha B'Av is washing ourselves. but nevertheless, such a practice existed. Now, the great rabbis came out against it, but nevertheless, they tried to defend why it was done in some communities. And they noted that we, yes, mourn our Tisha B'Av, but we want to have some elements of remembrance that there's going to be a better future for us. And in rabbinic tradition, Mashiach was born on Tisha B'Av. Mashiach was born on Tisha B'Av. One of our kids, Aaron, was born on it was Tisha B'Av. It was actually the 10th of Av. It was a nidcha. So I always didn't want to mess with him too much because you never know. He might be Mashiach, and I don't want to start up with the Mashiach. But due to the fact that we want to have faith on Tisha B'Av, that one day this will turn into a day of happiness, so therefore, to avoid people losing their hope and faith that redemption is going to take place, there was a practice that women would wash their head. So I'm not going to read this all in detail, because Rav Yosef Kara tells us that Ani Omer Minaga Nishtaka. It is an unacceptable practice. So therefore, halachically speaking, it's not relevant. Nevertheless, in one area in halacha, it does make its appearance that we do consider the afternoon of Tisha B'Av a little bit different than the morning, and that's what we're going to be discussing. Because number one, Reb Moshe Isserlis tells us that the custom is that melacha, work, is not done on Tisha B'Av. Nevertheless, nohagin leakel b'melacha ubekama dvarim achar chatzot. In other words, of course, you're not going to go ahead and wash yourself after chatzot, because that is prohibited unless you're removing dirt. And by the way, this year, washing your hands with soap, due to the fact that it's recommended medically, that's not considered washing for pleasure. And therefore, halachically, it would be permissible this year to remove dirt from hand, especially if you touch something that someone else did. Of course, if you are concerned about the virus, washing with soap is not included in the prohibition. The prohibition relates to rechitza shel ta'anug, of pleasure. Rechitza shel ta'anug is avoided the whole day. However, notes Ramo that there are some areas where you are lenient achar chatzot, not regarding rechitza, but for example, some people do some work and clean up their house a little bit. Another example is the minhag of not sitting on a regular chair, but rather sitting on a lower chair. That's a minhag. That minhag comes to an end by chatzos. So when on Tisha B'Av, you do return that pillow to the couch and return to a normal seat, be mindful you're doing it in the afternoon, because it is a time when we are filled with hope that a Mashiach is going to come, make our lives better, the Jewish people's lives better, and fix the flaws of humanity. So this is something that is, again, the uplifting elements of Tisha B'Av that are important to be mindful. Now, men who daven with the talis and tefillin daily know that on Tisha B'Av you put on your talis and tefillin in the afternoon. Fine, we are familiar with it. Now, although that has been the practice for the past few hundred years, it was a debated issue. It was a debated issue because the old German practice was, and I mean old, I mean German practice that goes back to the early 13th century. The old German practice was no tefillin at all on Tisha B'Av. Now, meaning they would go 24 hours, the whole day, no tefillin. And this was something that many halachic authorities viewed as problematic. Because yes, the Talmud tells us that we act as mourners, but that is, we do active things like mourners. There is no indication in the Talmud that you don't put on tefillin. So this was a major debate. And it is mentioned in the 13th century how Rabbeinu Asher, the Rosh, so we're visiting here the second half of the 13th century, Katav Adoni Avi Harosh, so his son, Rabbi Yaakov, is quoting his father, Rabbeinu Asher. And Rabbeinu Asher tells us, umistabra, it is logical to believe that on Tisha B'Av, chayav b'tfilin, you are obligated to put on tefillin. Why is it? And he says the following, that the mourner, yes, on day one, a mourner does not put on tefillin, right? We know that lo aleinu, after the passing of a relative, you're considered an onen. Although you start mourning after the burial, nevertheless, you are called an onen according to Torah law the whole day. In other words, my father, Olav Shalom, passed away 7:30 a.m. and it was a Thursday. The Levaya was at 2 o'clock at the Beit. We got back home, even though it was in the winter, right before Shkia. Nevertheless, I did not put on tefillin on that day. Why did I not put on tefillin on that day? Because Ovel, Avelus, Yom Rishon is called a Torah law onen, and an onen does not put on tefillin. Now, there's a major debate among authorities if the burial was not the day of passing, if the mourner puts on tefillin or not. So it's not our discussion now, but what Rabbeinu Asher tells us is the following. When we compare ourselves on Tisha B'Av to Avelim, we are not considering ourselves as Avelim of day one, but rather we are considering ourselves as mourners of day 2 through 7. And since those 6 days, day 2 through day 7, the mourner, the Ovel, puts on tefillin, so too argues Rabbeinu Asher, on Tisha B'Av, you wear your tefillin. And he means the morning. That's what he means. And that's what he tells us here. Lo chamir, it is not more stringent. What? Tisha B'Av, Misheshes Yemei Avelus, from the 6th day of Avelus. And therefore, for Rabbeinu Asher, no question, if we would turn to this great authority, who has guided German and Ashkenazi Jewry for the past 700 years, he was of the opinion you wear tefillin on Tisha B'Av. His teacher, the great Maharam Rabbi Meir of Rutenberg, unfortunately I saw in the news that they spray painted, or there was some kind of desecration of graves in Worms, and it seems to be that Maharam Rutenberg was one of the graves, hopefully nothing too significant. I know that a few people of the shul visited the grave of the Maharam of Rutenberg. But Rabbi Meir of Rutenberg, the master, the teacher of Rabbeinu Asher, wrote the following: "The betisha be'av ein lehaniach tefillin." We don't put on tefillin. Why? Because for Rabbi Meir of Rutenberg, Tisha B'Av is not compared to day 2 through day 7 of a regular morning, but rather he compares it to what? He compares it to the Yom Rishon Shel Avel. He compares it to day 1. And since on day 1, the mourner does not put on tefillin, so too on Tisha B'Av, no tefillin the whole day. And he explains, She'en Yom Mar Yoter Mimeno. It is the bitterest of days, because for generations we are remembering what we lost with the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Now, Rabbeinu Asher, the disciple, disagrees with the teacher, and he adds that the teacher deep down did not believe it, but rather he is defending a practice. So in the words of Rabbeinu Asher regarding the statement of his master Rabbeinu Meir, if Shar Shedachak, it is possible that his statement was only said Limso ta'am leminag Ashkenaz, only to defend the German practice of not wearing tefillin on Tisha B'Av. But the Rosh believed that the proper practice is, yes, to wear tefillin on Tisha B'Av. Now, we are all, I think, familiar with the way we do things. What do? We do not wear tefillin in the morning. We do wear it in the afternoon after chatzos. And here too, I think that this gives us a little bit of a picture how to view the second half of Tisha B'Av. If the first part of Tisha B'Av, starting from the night until midday, is a period of time when we are like onanim, where we cannot be comforted, the second part of Tisha B'Av, which begins by midday, at that point, we a little bit can be comforted. And therefore, it appears that the minhag that we have, that we do not wear our tefillin in the morning, but we wear it in the afternoon, is because a shift occurs. While in the morning, we see ourselves as onanim, where just as the onen, right, when lo'aleinu you go to a levaya, you don't say hamokum yinachem eschem before the burial. It's not a time to give comfort. It is a time to feel their pain because it is indeed painful. That is the experience we're supposed to have up until midday. After midday, we are considering ourselves as if we already buried the mace and we could in some way be comforted. What gives us comfort? The fact that one day, Be'ezras Hashem, we're going to return. So that is a shift that occurs in the second half of the day. And I'm going to, I think, prove it from another source that there's this shift that is taking place. Now, the Jerusalem Talmud tells us that on Tisha B'Av in davening, we're supposed to mention the day, just as on Rosh Chodesh in davening. We mention through the Yalav V'Yovu, we mention the fact that it's Rosh Chodesh. Just as on Shabbos, we go ahead and make reference to the day. So the Yerushalmi tells us, the Jerusalem Talmud tells us that so too on Tisha B'Av, we should make reference to the day in our davening. Now, where do we make reference to the day? So I'll quote you from the Tur. The Tur of Yaakov Balaturim tells us that when it comes to Tisha B'Av, tzarich lehaskir, it is a must to mention, me'ein ha'me'orah, meaning the event or the day or what is this, or the significance of the day, which is Nachem Hashem Elokeinu. We say Nachem, okay? The prayer of Nachem, Nachem Hashem Elokeinu es havalei Tzion, Almighty, please give comfort to those who mourn the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Now, where do we say it? V'omer also bebone Yerushalayim. You say it in the blessing of Bone Yerushalayim. Why? Lefi she'im inyana, because it relates to Yerushalayim. It is the day we remember Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim is significant not because of the fact that we can do good shopping there or go to good restaurants, but it's because it's our spiritual hub. It is only a complete spiritual hub when we have a Beis Hamikdash. So therefore, in the blessing, when we turn to the Almighty in prayer, that He should rebuild Yerushalayim as that spiritual location for us, we ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu to give us comfort. Now, when you read the earlier sources that indicate that it is important to make reference to Tisha B'Av in your davening, it is not only a requirement for mincha, it is a requirement for all prayers. Nevertheless, the minhag by us Ashkenazim is that we only mention Nachem in the afternoon. And this was surprising to Rabbeinu Asher. So we are told that the Rosh was always surprised. Kol Yamai, my whole life. Tmaheti, I was shocked. Lama ein omrim oto. Why do we not say it only ela betfilat hamincha? It was quite surprising for him. This is something that should be said not just mincha, but at all prayers. So this was something that disturbed him. Nevertheless, it is minhag Ashkenaz that we only say it in the afternoon. Now, why is it so? Why indeed do we only say it in the afternoon? So for that, I'm going to share with you a responsa that was written in Spain during the first half of the 14th century, or towards the middle, I would say, of the 14th century, by a Rav Yom Tov Ashvili. His family came from Seville. I don't know if you knew the barber or not there, but Rabbi Yom Tov HaSevili was one of the great rabbinic authorities. His commentary on the Talmud is probably one of the most popular of early authorities. And I'll share with you a tshuva that he writes. Now, he's talking about the prayer of Nachem on Tisha B'Av. And he shares with us something surprising, but it clarifies an issue. And he says the following, that you should know when it comes to Nachem, it is to be said, and he's a Sephardi, so don't follow his practice regarding this matter. He tells us that it is said at all prayers. Since this prayer of Nachem, since this prayer where we turn to the Almighty to rebuild, is a requirement for all tefillot, we say it Mariv, we say it Shachris, we say it Mincha. However, he notes that there's a difference. Shebe Arvit v'Shacharit, when it comes to Mariv Shachris, that at that moment, Shehu Kemi Shemeto Mutal Lefanav. In other words, he introduces this idea that we have to view ourselves until midday, not as mourners, but as lo aleinu, like an onen, like someone that is not ready to hear words of comfort because we have in front of us the one that needs to be buried. So since it is not a time of nechama, since it is not a time of comfort, so therefore it is not a prayer called nachem, but it's a prayer called rachem. Ve'eino b'nechama omer rachem. So the nusach is not Nachem Hashem Elokeinu v'savelei Tzion v'savelei Yerushalayim, not Nachem, because before midday you cannot ask for nechama, you cannot ask for comfort. What you could ask is for mercy. It's always appropriate to ask for mercy. Therefore, it is rachem. However, when it comes to the afternoon for mincha, then you could say nachem. Why can you make that switch? Because at that point, domeh lemi shenikvar meto. It is similar to someone who aleinu already buried his mace. So it comes out that midday switches it all. So this clarifies, number one, why for us Ashkenazim, we don't say Nachem in the morning, simply because you can't get comfort until midday. It also clarifies the practice of tefillin. Why do we not put on tefillin in the morning and we do put on tefillin in the afternoon? Because until midday, we are like onanim. And therefore, no tefillin. After midday, we could start getting that comfort. And the comfort comes from the knowledge that there's a future that's waiting for us. That is a time for nechama, and that's why we say nachem in the afternoon. So this is obviously important because, number one, it gives us clarity about our tefillos. It gives us clarity for those of us who put tefillin on, but also it uplifts our spirits. That Tisha B'Av is a time not just to sit there and cry for the past, but to be, number one, optimistic for the future, the birth of the Mashiach, and the fact that, yes, one day it will be a day of celebration, as the Mogen Avram says. I love quoting Ramosha, that even though in halachic literature, when a person sees Yerushalayim, he's supposed to do Kriya. Nowadays, says Ramosha, you don't do Kriya on Yerushalayim, because now, Baruch Hashem, it's Bnuyo Lesiferetz. It's a built city. We got to be very appreciative, even during these times, for the fact that we have a built Yerushalayim. Yes, we're waiting for the Beis Hamikdash, and yes, without the Beis Hamikdash, it's really does not have the significance it will have in the future. But you got to be appreciative. That's what is fundamental. That we have to give ourselves that comfort, and that is the change, the shift that occurs in the afternoon of Tisha B'Av. I would just like to mention also that the Talmud tells us, the Jerusalem Talmud tells us that Rav Yochanan was of the opinion that due to the fact that the majority of the temple was actually destroyed and burnt on the 10th of Av, therefore he notes that in his opinion, the fasting should really be on the 10th of Av. Now, we don't follow that obviously, and we mourn on Tisha B'Av and not on the 10th of Av. Nevertheless, it's mentioned in halachic literature that the proper practice is to extend some of the morning minhagim, some of the morning practices into the 10th of Av. What does that include? So we don't eat meat, we don't drink wine, we don't launder our clothes, we don't bathe for pleasure until midday of the 10th of Av. That's something we've been taught, we are familiar with, so you don't jump into the swimming pool yet until midday of the 10th of Av. This year it's a little bit different because anything that is for the honor of Shabbos is permissible already in the morning of Friday, Erev Shabbos. Okay, so anything that relates to Kavod Shabbos. So therefore, my haircut, I could get already Friday morning, right? My shaving I do Friday morning. Laundry could already be done on Thursday night because Thursday is a laundry day. And yes, we're not going to do it on Tisha B'Av, but Thursday night you could start doing your laundry. If someone is cooking something Friday morning for Shabbos and they want to taste a little bit to be sure that it doesn't have too little or too much salt, so it's permissible to taste that little bit because it's for Kavod Shabbos. So even though in general we wait until midday, anything that is for Kavod Shabbos would be considered acceptable. So that's a little bit of an adjustment that takes place this year. We're going to have Eicha over Zoom, and that will be later on in the bulletin next week or by next Friday. And so too, we're going to have our keynotes with Zoom to go ahead and study the keynotes on Tisha B'Av itself, proper 10 a.m. to 12 noon. I'm going to unmute everyone if we have any comments or questions or thoughts about what we've studied here.